Good morning, Mr. Seeklander.
Hey, good morning.
How are you, sir?
Good. Man, now that I got my camera working, I should shut some other things down here. Folks, if you're watching us live, which I assume we are live, although I don't see anybody popping on, I added shooting performance to your stream, man. I don't know if you're going live there or not, but I added that. No eyeballs on so far, which is kind of weird. Maybe we're alone, Rich. Oh wait, there's one person watching right now. So weird. My camera stopped working, dude. I had to completely reset my computer, and I don't know. I wonder if it has something to do with the AT&T phone glitch.
One never knows.
Did you have that happen to your phones?
No.
Are you AT&T?
No, sir.
Oh, okay.
No, I am not. Thank you to the 4 folks watching us live. Please like and hit that share button. You know, technology is freaking awesome, man, but we can over rely on it, which is we're going to talk about red dots today. Speaking of technology that we rely on a lot today.
Yep.
But before we get going, man, Defenders and Disciples, my good friend Taylor is on. He says, I had to refresh my browser window so that the video played. We're having some problems today. Pat Cahill is on. Good morning, Pat. Gerald is on from Oregon. Bruce is on up there in Michigan. Good morning, folks. And I see a bunch of numbers on there, Mike. What is all this number stuff I'm seeing here?
Well, if I had to guess, I would suspect that's probably their incredible American Warrior Society coined number, their coin numbers. By the way, we've had a bunch of low numbers on, or at least on my live show, which I've been doing on Wednesdays at 9:30, by the way, Rich. Recently, I had, who did I have on the other day? I had Joey Russo on the other day. He's a really low coin number. So it's always cool to jump on and find out who the lowest coin number on is, folks. If you're listening to my voice right now, of course, and you don't know what a coin member is, that's a member of the American Warrior Society, America's premium self-defense society, and you can check out www.americanwarriorsociety to learn more. If you're listening to this audio podcast or watching us live on Facebook or on the replay on YouTube or wherever you're going to be watching it or listening to it, check us out. Trust us, it will be worth your time and investment.
Yeah, click the links in today's show notes, and if you're having some issues, like a lot of folks, like I'll be 55 there, Mike, and you're having some problems getting out of bed, maybe you're considering TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, look no further than picking up a copy of On Violence and Varietals. It's guaranteed to increase your testosterone by at least 300 points. That's all you got to do, folks. Pick this up and read it, and you'll thank me tomorrow. I also want to, before I let Mike, he's chomping at the bit to talk about that. Let's also talk about painting over rust. Our good friend, Dr. T.C. Fuller's stories from a 20-year odyssey in the FBI. All you got to do is click the links in today's show notes. Made it real simple for you. Or go to AmericanWarriorShow.com. On the right-hand side of the page, you'll get links to all of our amazing sponsors. He also wrote this really cool book, No Safe Alternative, Improving How We Teach Cops to Kill. And boy, I tell you what, Mike, the videos I see, that they do need some help on that.
Amen, they do. Folks, if you're listening to my voice right now, I want to remind you, as I always do without cutting in the middle of the show, that we do have a website. So Rich's book and all of the books and other sponsors like Precision Holsters and Cool Fire Trainer, of course, Mountain Man Medical, and a variety of others are all listed on the show website, AmericanWarriorShow.com. Of course, AmericanWarriorSociety.com is where you're going to find out more about becoming a coin member, but AmericanWarriorShow.com is a great place to check out the show notes and just check out all of the other sponsors, which, of course, we have a lot of great companies that sponsor us. Every one of the companies offers products or services that we use personally. So, they're not someone that calls us and says, hey, we want to sponsor the show. And Rich and I do an ad read and just start talking about a product without actually knowing, hey, literally, this is worthy of your attention and, more importantly, your money. So go to the website. If you want to click on the links or use the discount codes, you can find out all about them.
Yeah, Gerald says Mike's latest book coming soon. That's something we don't talk enough about, man. You've written a lot of books going back probably almost 20 years now. And I was just at a shooting course recently, and somebody was like, yeah, man, I love Mike's book. The one you did on instructorship. What was it called? The Art of
Instruction, man. Yeah, we co-wrote that to an extent. You wrote a big part of that, and I think we were supposed to revise that. So, Gerald, I don't know about my latest book. Writing a book, as Rich knows, and everybody that maybe has written a book knows, is a challenging goal to meet. For those that don't know, that are listening to my voice right now, of course, I have 3 primary training books: defensive handgun, competition handgun, and defensive rifle, then the art of instruction, and then a small book called The Low Light Fight on Low Light. I think they're well done, although in my first couple did some self-editing along with Mr. Rich Brown. So folks, if you haven't checked those out, check them out. Actually, in the live stream I did last week, I was doing a rifle live stream. If you're not checking out my live shows, folks, I'm back at it 9:30 Central Time to try to get more of the Californians on. But a guy jumped on and said, "I'm going to buy your book right now because of this live show." So,
and if you're a member of the American Warrior Society, those are ebooks free for you to read and download in the training vaults. It's not just the training programs are in there, everything from how to build a go bag, white belt to blue belt. We got Jason Kelly, American top team wrestler, teaching unarmed combatives, as well as Christian Dare. Everything you need to keep you and your family safer in this insane world we live in is in the training vault. Well, at least until this new bill passes and they make that kind of training illegal.
Right.
Americans.
Who knows, man?
What are you gonna do?
We may be the underground warrior society soon.
Yeah, we may be. And I've talked about that. One of my great grandfathers, Looney McDaniel, died in Confederate prison camp because he was a Union guerrilla, and I don't want that to happen to us. But crazier things have happened.
I hear you, man. So what are we talking about today, Rich? I think you wanted to discuss rifle optics, and I have a few sitting by my desk here. Of course, I'm going to try to stay very close to the microphone because I know a lot of you will be listening to this podcast later on in audio form, so I'll make sure I translate everything we're talking about if you're not watching the video as well. So, man, where do we want to go this morning?
Well, yeah, just a sneak peek of what some of the topics we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about rifle optic selection, setup, zeroing, the defensive use of that rifle and its optic. Maybe we'll dip our toe into PCC and what the differences are. Handgun, red dot, selection, setup, zeroing, all that stuff. Baseline skill development inside the appendix inside the waistband. Ken Hackathorn is blowing up the interwebs in the gun world for some things he said about appendix carry. So we're going to dip our toe into all that today, man.
Yeah, I think more than likely depends on the time, folks. And if you're watching right now and listening, feel free to throw some questions up. We'll probably focus mainly on one of those subjects, probably the rifle today, depending on how long that goes, so we can really kind of give the other subjects the credence they deserve. And I did see some videos online, and I've reached out to my contacts at Wilson Combat on some of the commentary. It seems pretty interesting. People are certainly opinionated about those subjects. I'm not sure if I want to
let's clear. I don't know, man. Let's clear the air on that. Appendix inside the waistband? I happen to be carrying appendix inside the waistband right now and have since the early 90s. Does it come with some dangers? Yes, but there's a specific reason why it may or may not be the right carry position for you. Mike, you want to walk us through some of those?
Well, to be honest with you, so we'll briefly, because maybe podcasts and videos get more views and likes and follows and listens because of controversy. Let's talk about what you're talking about in terms of what Ken did, and then kind of cut it there. I don't know. I really want to focus and save an appendix show for a standalone show coming up. So those shows we propose, like today is going to be rifle, folks. It's all about rifle optics, mounting, selection. I kind of want to have maybe a realistic discussion with you defenders that are not in law enforcement and military anymore, and maybe how you should consider setting up a rifle. But what happened is, apparently on the Wilson Combat YouTube channel, and then I think there's some snippets that are released on Instagram, which is where I saw them. Ken is a friend of mine, an older gentleman, a legendary firearms trainer. I love him to death. Have tons of respect for him. And certainly, like every instructor out there, Rich, we all have some different opinions, and Ken has some different opinions. And I think that maybe those videos were edited in a manner where they only showed a snippet of what he had to say. But he did seem to be poo-pooing on the appendix position, which is fine if that's his opinion. And in one video, he was poo-pooing on weapon-mounted lights. But, folks, if you're listening to this right now, as you know, I'm a Wilson Combat sponsored shooter. I have a ton of respect for Ken. And without fully watching the entire video, I won't make a determination. And I wouldn't make a comment anyways, because I love the guy and I love Wilson Combat. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to close that door.
Yeah, I certainly didn't mean to imply that we should bash Ken Hackathorn, for God's sake. I mean, a man's a patriot. He's done a lot for the gun community. He's opinionated, as am I and everybody. And if I'm on here 3 hours a week, right? You could take any 8-second snippet of something I said and place it out of context. But I mean, again, there's a reason for it. And I think let's just do an entire show on it sometime.
Yeah, folks, and if you have something that you want us to discuss, Rich and I had a text conversation. The reality is this is an audio podcast, so when Rich brings a guest on, it has to be good for audio because we want to release it as a podcast. So if I am teaching the pivot or step and move or whatever else, those are better done on my technical training days, which are typically on Wednesday mornings. In these cases, these will be a discussion, and Rich and I have decided to discuss rifle. I do have some rifles next to me, and I'll stay close to the microphone. We'll talk about, first focal plane, second focal plane, variable optics for a civilian defender. But our lineup is also appendix carry. We're going to specifically cover that because Rich and I both carry an appendix, and I think there are some things that you need to consider if you do so. We're also going to talk about optics on a handgun. We'll keep that for a separate show because I want to show you some optics and also show you some of the things I've learned over the last 6 or 7 months with optics and training exclusively with optics. And but if there's another subject you want, Rich, I know Rich is always saying, hey, reach out to him, Rich at AmericanWarriorSociety.com and say, hey guys, will you cover this subject? We tend to try to stick to unique subjects that you'll learn from in the show itself. So because it is an audio format. So Mr. Rich, you want to jump into the rifle stuff, man, or we want to talk about anything else before we go? Any other news and events, man?
No news and events. We're live on YouTube as well. If it would be better for you to put the phone down or the laptop down, turn the smart TV on and watch us there, please do that as well. No, man, let's jump into it, brother. Rifle optic selection, setup, zeroing, the defensive use of an optic on a rifle. Take it wherever you like, brother.
Well, folks, so first of all, if you're on right now, of course, give us a like and a share. As always, bring more folks on. Tell them we are live on the Facebook pages, Shooting Performance, American Warrior Society, and of course, the good old YouTube page. So, Rich, so the first thing I want to throw out there, and I want people to ask themselves this, and I'll ask you this as well, Rich, is why do we spend so much time talking about an AR system or a rifle or a home defense rifle or setting up my home defense rifle or home defense PCC? And I'll give you an example. Someone made a comment maybe 3 or 4 lines ago. I'm trying to find it where there. Tiny says, wait, Craig Turnell, Colonel USMC says the AR platform has absolutely no place in civilian self-defense world and in court as an expert witness. Certainly, I think you and I would disagree with that. But at the same time, let's get the context set very, very quickly. If you were in the U.S. military, certainly you're going to carry, an automatic rifle of some sort, right? Whether it's a semi-automatic system or fully automatic system or a combination of burst system or whatever, that's going to be your primary weapon, if not something bigger and better. If you are in law enforcement as a standard patrol officer, you probably have a patrol rifle of some variant in your vehicle these days, probably, I think, more so than a patrol shotgun, which Rich and I probably both had back in the day. I don't think either of us had a patrol rifle. So those make sense. But for you defenders out there that are just civilians like me now, why are we so wrapped around setting up a home defense rifle, Rich? What's behind that, man?
Well, you want to be able to, that's a funny question. And to answer it, I will say this. Sometimes, rarely, if ever, is violence the answer. However, when it is, it's the only answer. And I saw a stat one time that said during World War II, during the 4 years of World War II, the United States of America produced over 9 billion rounds of ammunition, enough to kill every man, woman, and child multiple times over. So why do they have to do that? Because sometimes Lethal force is the answer. And that platform happens to be a very versatile, very reliable platform with which to dispense lethal force. And I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but that's kind of where I'm thinking.
Well, so here's the deal. When we desire to have an AR type system or any automatic rifle like that, semi-automatic rifle set up as a defensive type tool, we have to put it into context, right? And one of the issues I have is there's so many people out there that they set these guns up because here's the real truth, because they like them. They like to own them. They like to shoot them. They're cool or whatever else. But I don't know if they necessarily walk through the context of when they're actually going to use that system versus probably the primary tool as a civilian defender, which is going to be the handgun. And honestly, probably the primary tool in most law enforcement settings as well. So when we talk about that, and I completely agree, the reality is it's a tool, right? For me, I think it's a multi-purpose tool, right? So it's a multi-purpose tool that may have a defensive use as a civilian defender, but also maybe useful as a hunting firearm, and also maybe useful in the possibilities where maybe I'm not defending my home against just a single intruder, but multiple intruders, or potentially I'm on the south border and there is, even a bigger, badder threat. Who knows? Maybe the aliens we've been shooting down over the last year finally land and attack us. I don't know. But the bottom line is it's a highly efficient tool, and it's also a great multi-purpose system, right? And I think about that a lot. It's a multi-purpose system. There are lots of circumstances in real life where someone could probably accomplish some sort of defensive use, even in the self-defense realm, at longer ranges than 75, 85, 90, or 100 yards. Now, will a civilian defender be engaging, right? When we talk about these variable optics, which I have one here, right? Will we be engaging it at 300 or 400 yards? I have a hard time seeing anyone articulating an active self-defense at 300 or 400 yards. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it's completely out of the realm, but you'd have to have some very interesting articulations in that particular case. So folks, if you're thinking about, putting an optic on a rifle, that's the first question you have to ask is, what am I going to use it for? And I'll give you an example, Rich. This is one of my AR setups. This is the one that actually I was probably carrying in a picture you and I post on a regular basis up in the mountains of Wyoming. So you may say, well, Michael, why do you have a Vortex variable optic on this particular rifle? Why am I going to put a variable optic? This is a Primary Arms variable optic. They actually sent me one recently and haven't got it on a rifle yet. Great optics, by the way, on a different platform. And the reality is the gun I was carrying at that point in time was a hunting gun as well. So we were out there calling coyotes, looking for predators or the option or whatever else. So once again, I think that having a rifle set up as a multi-purpose type tool is probably not just a good idea, but a very, very logical idea, in which case that may guide your optic selection. Rich, if your rifle, if your home defense or your property defense tool is only going to be used at 50 or 60 yards on your property, that's the extent of your property, well, then I don't know if we ever really need a variable optic. But if Mike Seeklander's home defense rifle might be used in 50, 60 yard context on my property, but then I may drive to Wyoming and use it to hunt a deer with, or a coyote with, or whatever else, that completely changes what I select as far as my optic and how I set it up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's all context related, but I think what everybody is looking for, and you alluded to it, is a one size fits all solution. And I don't know that there really is one. Maybe the LVPO or whatever, the low powered variable optic, is the right solution, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's a red dot. I think I look at weapons like golf clubs, right? What are we doing? Are we pitching or are we putting? Because that's going to determine which one I go to. I'm carrying a handgun. Is that the best thing to get into a gunfight with? Hell no. But it meets a couple of other criteria, right? It's concealable. It's portable. If all things were equal, I would carry a rifle, right? If I'm really planning on getting a gunfight. So all these things are context specific, and I think a lot of people lose sight of that.
Well, the handgun is also defendable
Mhm.
in closer quarters. It's maneuverable, which means that, if you are searching the room you're in right now or a closet or whatever else, you could probably operate and utilize that handgun in manners where to do so with the rifle, you're going to have specifically train different positions and have limited control over that long gun. Now, granted, if you walk out to your yard and you have a big yard, of course,
Mhm.
and for whatever reason, maybe the next ice storm happens and your generator's churning and this thing doesn't end in a week and a half, but it's now 6 weeks into it.
Mhm.
And the power grid has failed, right? For whatever reason. Well, now you're literally defending your property at that 70, 80, 90, 100-yard mark. And you're probably literally defending your property realistically against maybe a vehicle with 6 or 7 guys with shotguns or whatever else.
Mhm.
And that's important to understand that that context is specifically where a home defense rifle comes into, its beauty. It is literally the perfect tool for that. And I'm not talking about, a situation that's unrealistic, right, Rich? We're talking about a situation that you are actually in. Carry
Mhm.
that situation, fast forward it 3 or 4 more weeks where there hasn't been really any food. And maybe the National Guard or the US military is trying to reach out, but they can't for whatever reason. Put it in whatever context you want. That is completely realistic. And that is also a circumstance where, and let me break it down to you where I'm going with this is if I am in my area right now, I live in a home in a subdivision. The maximum distance to my property outside is maybe 25 yards, Rich, to any corner of my property. So if I'm defending my property, it won't ever be farther than maybe 25 yards. So let me switch out rifles. So my short barrel rifle or shorter barrel rifle with a one powered optic on it, right? This has a hollow sun variant optic on it. We talk about that, some things I've learned about that as well, will allow me to successfully defend all day long at any appropriate distance on my property. Well, and then you may say, well, Mike, well, why would we ever, because you said, well, it's not always a one size fits all kind of a deal. Well, why would we ever have the lower, low power variable optic in that particular case? Because I may be in that same circumstance where now I need to leave my property, right? And maybe there's a potential threat that's going to be farther away. But one of the circumstances that I find that variable optic comes into its own is identification of what's happening. And once again, I'm going to go back to it, use multiple use platform. Like, so that same circumstance, powers out, guys are potentially coming to your property, but in that same circumstance, maybe possible you might need to go shoot a deer, right? Or whatever. That is where the variable optic truly comes into play. Or as you and I both own as well, a one power optic with a magnifier. So for me, this one power optic allows very, very good portable use of the gun where I could be in close ranges, CQB type distances, room distances. I can literally defend my home inside my home. It's very, very fast outside the home. But I could put a magnifier on it in 1 second that now allows me to do the same thing I would do with a variable optic. The problem with a magnifier though is, do you carry the magnifier somewhere on your person, or do you leave it on the rifle and flip it out of the way if you're just going to use one power? And while that's possible, you'll find very, very quickly that if you're in and out of a vehicle and you're storing the firearm behind a seat, it's difficult. That magnifier either is on or flipped down and off the gun out of the way, if that makes sense.
No, it does, and I've got a magnifier on mine, Aimpoint Pro, and with I think it's a Vortex magnifier. Don't quote me on that, but I like it. But like you said, it's not perfect, and really, there's nothing perfect. And that kind of goes to Pat Cahill's comment. It says, "Don't overlook the fact that the defender may have limited financial resources and can only afford one gun. In that case, you want to set up the gun to be as versatile as possible." And we're all looking for that versatility, I think. And let's see here. Taylor says, "Do either of you gentlemen have a preferred zero for your optic?" And yeah, we're definitely heading in that direction. Do you want to take that on right
Yeah,
now?
so we'll talk about, then we'll open up for Q&A. We'll talk a little bit more about the variable optic versus the one power and the magnifier option. But as far as zeroing, here's what I have generally written about and stuck to across the board. I am generally going to do a primary zero at 50 yards, right? And then have probably a secondary intersection point that is between 260 yards or farther out, right? So if we're talking about a standard 223 round, 55 grain 223 with an optic mounted at pretty much standard height, whatever that would be, an inch and a half over the bore, a 50-yard zero typically is the first intersection point. If you don't know what I'm talking about, folks, think about this. You know, when you have an optic mounted on anything, whether that's a handgun or a rifle, the optic and what you're seeing in terms of the reticle or the dot travels to infinity. Now, of course, because it's mounted an inch and a half on top of the gun, or for a handgun, 1 inch-ish on top of the gun, we actually have to angle the optic in a manner where the barrel and the optic intersect. So a lot of folks think, well, the bullet comes out of the barrel and goes up. It doesn't go up. But in relation to the optic, the barrel is angled up slightly, if you could envision that in your mind. And where the line of sight, the dot or the reticle, and the bullet intersect the first time is the first intersection, right? And then in theory, the bullet's path is still going straight. It hasn't started to drop back down to the earth. So now your line of sight would actually be below the bullet's path. So after that 50-yard line, your hits would be high. And then eventually gravity takes over. The bullet starts to travel back to the earth, and it crosses back over that visual intersecting line of the optic, the dot or the reticle, and that's your secondary point. So if you have a good zero, the right zero for you, then we're going to minimize, your maximum ordinate, which is the amount the bullet will hit high, and extend your distance out as far as possible. And for the civilian defender, law enforcement guy, I think the practical use there is we want to set up so we don't have to do a lot of mental math. I'm not talking about long range shooting, because if we're talking about long range shooting, PRS type shooting, or the stuff my buddy Travis does, with certain groups, he's going to probably zero almost exclusively at 100 yards. A hunter that's going to be doing long range hunting or longer range hunting is probably going to be zeroing at 100 yards. And then don't ever forget, folks, we're talking about zeroing. We do an initial zero to get on paper and get a level of accuracy, but then you have to check zeros farther out. But my primary simple zero is going to be a 50, 250, or 5,300 zero on the rifle. And then you check it at 100 yards, check it at 200 yards, and see how far you're falling at 300 yards. But once again, Rich, I'll go back to context. It's like, well, where are you hitting at 320 yards? Well, I'm a civilian defender. Unless I'm shooting a 3-gun match, I'm not entirely. I'll want to be able to hit at 300 yards, but I'm not necessarily as worried about that. So for me, a nice flat trajectory of that 50, 200-ish is about right. 50, 300.
Yeah, and so oddly enough, we were me and my brother were zeroing his 308 yesterday, and our range is supposed to have a 25, 50, a 100, and a 200, right? And so I took my laser rangefinder out there yesterday. I'm like, let's just see how accurate it is. I'm like, okay, 25 is cool, 50 is cool, 100 is good to go, and what is supposed to be 200 was like 184.
Oh, yeah.
So I kept wondering, like, why am I not getting that? My 50 and 200 was way off. The round was striking like 6 inches higher. And well, there's the reason why it's not true. So I think you can't just assume that the range is built correctly, and you have to test it. And when you test it, what your holdover is. Now, another thing, does the grain weight of the bullet change that? So like I try to stick with 1 grain. Like I don't mix 5.56 and 2.23, even though I probably can in that Wilson combat rifle I have. But I try to stick to 1 bullet weight so that I know exactly where that round's going to impact. Is that something?
Yeah, that's a good point, Rich. So let's talk about that real quick. And folks, full disclosure, I am very efficient and versed in what I would call CQB, and I don't mean that in the terms of military. I do a lot of CQB. I'm talking about closer quarter battle distances. To me, that's 0 to 100 yards. That is the civilian defender distance. If you're in law enforcement and maybe some civilian defenders in certain cases, you live on a ranch in Wyoming or New Mexico down on the south border, that may extend out to 200 to 300 yards if you're defending yourself, not using it as a hunting tool. So I primarily know and teach and I guess influence people from 0 to 300 yards, right? So understand that from 0 to 300 yards, those are what a PRS or a long range shooter would call very close range. That is close range stuff, where ballistics like wind and some of these other things don't matter nearly as much. So yes, so 101, ballistics 101, number one, stick to whatever grain bullet is going to be efficient for whatever you're going to use it for, because you're exactly right, Rich. If you shoot a 55 grain 223, 556, whatever, and then you go out and shoot a 75 grain bullet, right, that may hit a little harder on steel that a 3-gunner might use, it is going to completely change ballistics. Keep in mind that everything affects ballistics: the velocity, the weight of the bullet, the distance that the optic is mounted over the bore itself, and then all of the other things come into play as well in ballistics, humidity, elevation, but those things are generally not affecting what we're trying to do at the distance we're trying to do until you get much farther out. And that is not something I do or teach, so I never claim to be really, really good at long range shooting. I mean, I certainly some of the best guys in the business, I know them. I won't give his last name out because I don't have permission to, but my buddy Travis is someone I would point anybody to, and if you want a connection, or I could probably make that. So yes, Rich, everything is affected by your bullet weight. And even if you stick to the same bullet weight, but it's a different velocity,
Right.
That's going to change your point of aim, point of impact, which is why I think a civilian defender would start with a good 50-yard zero, right? And then verify that zero and see where you're hitting at 100 yards. And what you'll start to see as you get farther out is you will definitely see an elevation shift, which we're expecting. We should expect to hit slightly high with a 50-yard zero. But what you're also looking for is windage shifts, right? Because a lot of times you think your windage will be on and it won't be. So you've got to do your verification at 100 yards and then 200 yards. And then for the heck of it, push out to 300 yards to see where you're hitting.
Yeah, I want to get to Taylor's question. My brother Jeff is on. Good morning, Jeff. Thank you to the 34 folks that watching us live. Please like and hit that share button, guys. Just getting going here. I want to get to his question in just a second, but knowing your holdover and having something in your mind, I think is incredibly important. Like, for example, with a 5200, if I'm shooting room distance shots and I'm shooting somebody I want to shoot them in the brain, I'm aiming for hairline and stuff like that. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, Rich, keep in mind, and you are exactly right. So, but here's the interesting thing: if you have a 50-yard zero, because your optic, right, is on the top of the gun, until you get to 50-yard distances, you're going to be hitting low. But if I hold up this optic, you could see in the video that the optic itself, if you figured out where the red dot was in relation to the barrel, it's going to be about 1.5 inches. So the maximum you will hit, in this case low, is about 1.5 inches. Now, if you had to take a headshot on someone inside your property, and you aimed in the center of their head, and that bullet hit 1.5 inches low, right? That's okay. It's in a headshot, it doesn't make any difference, right? Now, granted, we probably want to hold a little high, and we want to know that maybe in the case of the famous hostage type shot, we always want to have the ability, well, I got a family member, you got to take that shot. When is that ever going to happen? I don't know. But if we're a professional defender, we need to be able to do these things. Then you might need to hold a little high. Now think about this in terms of engaging center mass. Maybe you are a maximum of 1.5 inches low. So if you're aiming at the upper center chest, let's say we're trying to hit a 6-inch circle in the upper center chest, and you aimed and you have a good shot, right? You're going to hit a maximum of 1.5 inches low. So you're within that 6-inch circle. Now let's push it to 50 yards. If you can hold center chest, you're going to hit within that 6-inch circle. Now let's push to 100 yards. Now you might be a maximum of 1.5 inches high, because remember, you're past the point where your optic and your line of sight and your bullet trajectory cross over, right? So you're now at your maximum ordinate, maybe 1.5 inches high, which means if you hold center, you're still within that 6-inch defensive circle. Now the bullet, starts to travel back to the earth at 200 yards plus. It's not exactly 200 yards. It depends on the barrel length and the velocity. It starts to drop down, and you're probably hitting dead on, if you can hold that accurate, at 200 yards. And then after that, the bullet may start to fall off pretty quickly, depending on the weight. So the point there is there's no mental math at any distance at all, unless you had to take a hostage shot and you're trying to shoot within 1.5 inches of accuracy for that hostage shot, which to me it's almost completely unrealistic. I think we need to know these things and practice for these things. But in most cases, that's the beauty of that 50-yard zero, those closer range zeros.
Yeah. Taylor says, do either of you gentlemen use or have a preferred preference on optic risers? Do you have, Mike?
No, so I use pretty much a standard. So when we're talking about risers, how high should the optic be off the gun? If you listen to some of the rifle content that I teach, as Rich knows, drop, drive, pull, press is something you may hear me say, which means drop the elbow, drive the shoulder, pull the sock into your chest, and press your cheek into the cheek weld. One of the things that you're going to find to be fast with a rifle or a PCC, you have to have a fast and perfect cheek weld, right? I want to build as quick as cheek weld as possible. So when I if I see a lot of guys, they're running very high risers or higher mounted optics for a standard night observation device unit that doesn't pan out necessarily, because it brings your face up too high and I can't get my cheek weld where I want to very, very quickly. So for example, with my Holosun, it's the standard mount that comes with it. I think that would be, I don't know if it would be described as a low mount. Same thing with with the variable optic. They're I would call them medium risers or medium height mounts, medium to low versus very, very high mount risers or optics, because I like to get my cheek down on the stock itself. To me, that's a part of the control of the rifle itself.
I see that you bring up a good point here. And I don't know if people heard what you just said, because what you said was a lot of times you'll see and I'm going to use like a Ken hackathon word, kind of the cool. I don't know what that noise is. Do you hear that?
I think someone just drove by showing off their Mustang here. Maybe that's what I was saying. I'm not certain.
Interesting. But the higher riser, a lot of times it looks cool, but it's actually serving a function, and that is somebody's wearing nods because that's what their mission set requires. My mission set, your mission set, protecting our families and things of this nature that we're going to do with the rifle. We don't need that. What we need to do is, to your point, be able to get a faster, better cheek weld on the rifle so that we can fire the rifle. And that goes for a lot of the stuff that people hang on the rifle is not necessary per se for the average civilian defender.
Well, you and I experienced that, Rich. Do you remember, Rich, the time that I was teaching a law enforcement group? We were out west somewhere, and it was a rifle class. And the folks, what stood out to Rich and I in that class is very unique, because once we got to the time in the class where we were applying the shooting skills in real life positions. So there was a tire there was a telephone pole, and they had a vehicle there. And you had to come into these different positions and brace on the vehicle and like moving the rifle in and out. And Rich and I observed these guys that had these monopods and all this other crap, lights on the left and the right. We could talk about that briefly if you want to, getting hung up all over the place. And it didn't serve any purpose as far as shooting. And my setup is pretty simple, just like Rich's. It's a light at 6 o'clock, a light switch at 12 o'clock, an optic, and then a magnifier if possible. But Rich and I, it was funny to observe all these guys that had all kinds of stuff on getting hung up. So
again, just try it. That's all you got to do. And try it. You'll discover a lot of things, like the whole idea of where to mount the light out on your gun. But that's they could do a damn show just on that, man.
Well, I mean, so since we're talking about it and someone's listening right now, they're going, well, what do you mean by that? So, I'll share this on the video. You can see my rifle light. The rifle light is mounted at, it's 6 o'clock and the switch is at 12 o'clock, right? Specifically. And this is the only place that I would mount a light on my civilian Defender gun, because I don't have a PEC laser system on the top of it, which may force me to rotate a white light to the left or right hand side, right? So for me, where I'm just running a white light with a switch, there's one place to put it, and that's the bottom. That's 6 o'clock. And the reason I do that is because 12 o'clock does not work. If you're listening to me and you don't believe me, try it. You'll find it will fail. Trust me. I've tried it multiple times. I wanted it to work. It won't work in all conditions. And what happens is, if you can envision this, a light on at 12 o'clock on an optic rail, right? On a rifle rail, illuminates the smoke in that position as it comes out of the muzzle, because all of these breaks, no matter what you're shooting, have a bunch of smoke. So when that light washes into that smoke, it actually, when you're looking through the optic, occludes your vision just for a moment in time. So for longer range shots, it fails, especially on a hotter, humid, or more humid night. It fails. Probably wouldn't matter as much in a room distance deal, but it doesn't do any good to have it up at 12 o'clock, other than look cool on Instagram. At 6 o'clock now, the light is illuminating the smoke below the gun, which doesn't get in the way of your optic. And so if the light is at 6 o'clock, then of course the switch is going to be at 12 o'clock. And Rich has his set up the same way, because now Rich and I can switch arms if we need to. And the light switch can be activated by our thumb with either hand if you're into that switching hands. One more thing, a rifle light, I know this is out of the context of what we're talking about today. On the right or left, we saw that same thing in that class. It was in Montana, actually, where guys with their lights on the right and the left-hand side of the gun that would try to brace up against something like a telephone pole or the side of a vehicle, found their light would get in the way of that bracing aspect. So we had to do a quick bracing where we're pressing the gun up to the right or left, which is more realistic on, if you can envision a telephone pole or a metal pole or whatever else, those lights on the side of the gun really get in the way in terms of bracing, and you'll find that they fail to an extent, or it's not the best option unless there's truly a real reason for you to have the light there. Also, as a side benefit, if you're really trying to cut cover very closely, like the edge of a wall or vehicle, and you're let's say you're leaning to the right, and your rifle light is on the left side of the gun, that light will illuminate into the cover you're trying to creep around. So just something there.
Yeah, and Alan says the same thing. I see lights mounted on the left and right side. Plays heck if you're at a barricade. Tina is on. Good morning, Mike. Shared with Shoot with Girls of the Low Country. So good to have you on, Tina. So I don't know that we did much in terms of discussion this morning, in terms of discussing the selection of a rifle optic. I mean, we kind of tiptoed onto it, but let's kind of hammer that home.
Good point. Yes, good point, sir. Okay, so let me get back to my microphone here. Okay, so just two options. The one on the right, if you're watching the video, is a Holosun. I think their number designation is 507 for their rifle optic. The one on my left is the standard aim point patrol rifle optic. It's a slightly cheaper version of the aim point that comes with a standard riser, quick mounting solution. Fantastic optics. Both of them are fantastic. So let's talk about one power optic, like with a red dot optic selection 101. I have owned Holosuns, multiple Holosuns. I have probably 10 or 12 aim points. I have some EOTechs, and generally what I found is I tend to like a slightly bigger window. So if you look at my rifles and PCCs, now they actually have Holosuns on them. Back in the day, I had aim points on because aim points were fantastic in terms of battery life and durability. You could put a battery in an aim point and leave it on. Like literally, my optic on my rifles is turned on all the time on my defensive rifles. And you could replace the battery once a year and you're good to go. And Aimpoint was one of the first optics that had that solution back in the day. And I don't know what EOTech makes now. I certainly had the EOTechs. They were cool. There was some zero shifting stuff going on with EOTechs back in the day. I think they've solved that since. I think it's still a great company, but they also had an auto off feature, which I didn't like. If I want the optic turned on, I want it on, and then once a year you replace the battery. But now fast forward to these days, I find that the HoloSun open window is the fastest optic for me. It also has a variable reticle pattern. And something interesting, Rich, I was shooting with a group of guys that are really good shooters recently. And in the past, I have ran the reticle pattern. So when I say that it has variable reticle patterns, it has like a, I don't know, 16 MOA outer circle, an inner dot that's maybe like a 2 MOA. And you could run just the inner dot, or you can run just the outer circle, or you can run the inner circle and the inner dot and the outer circle. And I was running the outer circle and the inner dot, thinking it big, bright, robust, and seemed to work for me, right? But we started to race on steel at about 70 yards. So basically a steel 50 to 70 yards, steel plate you had to hit, small 8-inch steel, and then a stop plate. And man, I shut that outer ring off, and I found that just having the single center dot was measurably faster for me than having the whole thing on and having that outer ring maybe as a distractor. It's weird. I've heard people say, man, the outer ring on a handgun optic is too busy for me. And I always kind of poo-pooed and thought, nah, it's not really that busy. Just use the small dot in the center. And I don't know what it was about the visual processing, but when I turn that outer ring off, and I'm talking about a shot that has to be very precise, but of course we're shooting very fast because these guys are high-level shooters. But I really needed just one piece of information. I found that to be the best. But for some of you, the outer ring might be a good solution. And that's the beauty of something like the HoloSun. The Aimpoint has a single reticle. I think some of the EOTechs and Vortexes, they have some variable reticles. If I can get an optic, a one-power optic that's very bright, that's very big and open, I like an open window, I would select those. And if I could select one with a multiple reticle pattern, I would choose so. Now, Rich, I've got the green reticle color and I've got the red. I don't know if it matters. I tend to go back to red. I think red actually shows up for most people the best against most backgrounds. One last but not least, this HoloSun works with my magnifier just fine. Previously, I actually had an Aimpoint on, and then I threw the magnifier on this, and it works just as good. I do have my optics set a little farther forward on the gun. To me, that occludes my eye a little less, and I'm not as worried about eye relief. Remember, it's not a magnified optic, so eye relief is not that important to me. So I find my transitions to another target may very well be a little bit better. So certainly for now, I've been running these optics for a while. They've been solid as well. CNH, company I've been working with a little bit. They don't pay me. They don't sponsor me. Is going to be making some rifle optics soon. So I'll be testing those and see if I can break them. But those are my thoughts on a one power red dot optic.
Okay. So let's kind of, in conclusion on that, a little bit further forward, you like a bigger window because it's faster, and you like a single point dot. Red seems to, if I understood you correctly, show up better for most people. I know I use only red dot myself. I do want to, if you could put your rifle back up there, because I do want to ask you a question, Mike. So we talked about the durability of red dot optics. They've got the zero shift taken care of with EOTech, and everybody's good to go. Battery life is phenomenal. If all that being said, why are you running those irons? Iron sights?
Yeah, good question. So, and interestingly enough, on this one, I only have the front irons up, because what I found is at CQB distances, like the place where I would defend my home, I don't need the rear sight, the rear optic, and I probably wouldn't run it up anyways. With the cheek weld, I can actually, and I do this in some classes, I shoot a lot of targets through the optic just using the window itself. So if I have the target, if I have a good cheek weld and I have the target in the window, I pretty much know where I'm going to hit. With the front sight up all of the time, if I did have an optic failure, then I can very quickly just use the front sight in the optic itself with a good cheek weld, and I can engage to 25 yards very, very good. Now, I wouldn't engage. I wouldn't take the hostage shot at 25 yards. Like I said, this big hostage shot that never happens for civilian defenders. But man, my rifle's dirty. But yeah, that's why I have the front sight. But I'm gonna. I don't know, man. I think that's just the old school in me thinking. It doesn't. Let me put it this way, Rich. There's no downside to having the front sight on the gun right now. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't hurt anything. And I don't think the optics would fail, but if you're in a situation, I think, where you're defending your home and if you're in law enforcement in the military, definitely the chance of you maybe getting your optic shot or broken up, I think, are much higher. But as a civilian defender, maybe you're shooting out of maybe those guys coming to get your generator, Rich, launched around and it nicked off your optic, right?
Maybe. And if that happens, you got some big problems. I'm gonna really hurt a lot of folks here. I don't run backup iron sights because I've turned the optic off a lot, and for most shots, like you said, I know, blasphemy, and I get it. I grew up on irons, I get it, but it's just more shit to get hung up on the rifle. I mean, get hung up on.
Well, I don't. If there's no downside, have them. But I would.
There's not. But before you go and bash me, here's what I'm going to say, man. Show me a class where we've ever taught the rifle and everybody there has a zeroed rifle with the optic. Most of them don't. 80% the shit ain't even zeroed with their optic. Now show me somebody like, okay, use your flip up irons, and what percentage of those people have their irons zeroed. Now, I'm not saying they can't do that and shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is what I have found when I turn my little red dot off and I have the same cheek well I've had for the last 40 years, and I'm looking in the window and I'm putting it dead center, I'm going to get that shot most often than not, an acceptable combat effective hit. Now,
I wasn't going to poo-poo on you. I don't need an excuse to do that. I can do that no matter what. But the reality is, that's what I said. You really don't need those irons on there. If they have them, there's probably not a downside if you have it set up properly and you train to use them. I had a class I taught recently, and I had the shooters turn their red dots off on handguns to see what they would do. And a lot of times, if you can't really sneak it, but if you could sneak it and turn a guy's red dot off and he draws, instead of just defaulting to the backup iron sights, which in theory we should do, or just using the window on a handgun. We'll talk about this in our handgun show. They don't. Their brain just goes, stop. I don't know what to do. I need a dot. I don't know how to aim. And the reality is, on the rifle, you should do a surprising, maybe not a lot of practice, but some practice by turning your optic completely off. Now, if you have a low power variable optic, that may be a little bit different because you always have a reticle and you always have that glass. And if I remember correctly, you probably have an aim point on your gun. Now, one advantage of a smaller tubed optic is because of the smaller tube, you could use that window aiming method a lot more successfully than having to have a dot. Correct. Like if you have like an aim point micro or something like that, if you were looking through that optic and you have a cheek weld and that target is in the center of your optic, you're going to hit them. Yeah. And if you don't know that, just try that at the range.
I want to, because Pat has a great point. I see a lot of people running battery powered optics only on their ARs. They overlook the need for backup irons because there's only two types of batteries, good ones and dead ones. And I've had that happen, man. I was shooting a team 3-gun match a few years back, and I go, and this is there's a car out there and it's got a 10-inch plates where the driver and passenger is, and there's two 10-inch plates on either side of the vehicle. And I go just to kind of check my optic, and it's freaking dead. It's EOTech, and I got AA batteries, but they're back at the car or whatever. I'm like, damn it, what am I going to do? Because I need to hit these plates, and and instead of doing what I'm just saying I would do and shoot it, it's a match, right? So I grab my buddy's rifle and use it and shoot the thing. But so yeah, it does happen. And in that case, I probably should have put my money where my mouth is, Mike, and just shot it through the window, but I did not.
Well, there's limitations there. Like you said, depends on how far those plates are. If it's a rifle type match, they're going to set the plates out there 20, 30 yards. That's a different deal. Depends on the plate size. A human target at 25 yards through the window, yes, you will probably hit them, especially with a smaller optic. But You know, I'm
10-inch plate at 200 yards, man, and there was 4
not,
of them. I'm like,
not
no,
happening.
no.
No, good luck with that.
Yeah.
That's a great example of, well, for me, could I have hit that 10-inch plate with my front sight of my optic window? I don't know. Not that distance, but I could hit it at 50 yards. So and that's the interesting point. Sometimes I think people are so opinionated, like, this has to be this way. Well, it doesn't have to be a certain way, but whatever you do with it, however you have it set up, go test it. Turn your optic off and see what and how you can hit. What you're going to find right away, though, is at room distance, your brain needs to be reliant on pointing the rifle and just getting maybe your vision to the point where the threat is in the window somewhere. If you're taking much more time to aim the gun than that, unless there's people around the person, you're wasting time. You're over aiming the gun.
Yeah, Taylor, who's on today, he's got a great video coming out. I don't want to spoiler alert on this, but he dissects that Joe Olstein shooting. It's fantastic. But one of the things is, the officers that responded to, and they shot not only the woman who came in with a rifle, but they wounded the child she brought with her, and then they wounded, I think, another person. And part of that, we don't know what happened. There's no video that they've released yet. There's no forensics on who did what. But one of the things is it's contextual, man. When Taylor and I were discussing that shooting, she comes in saying she's got a bomb and she's got a backpack strapped to her chest, and she's running toward the assemblage of X number of people. Now, you and I both know, we were combat engineers, and you know what a satchel charge can do. I mean, my God, man, it'd blow this entire house to pieces. So with that being said, if she's running toward the assemblage, man, am I going to take a perfect shot, or am I going to take a good enough shot and try to burn her down and stop her before she gets in there? I mean, everything is contextual, man. It's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, it is, man. Do we want to, what else on the 1-power red dot do we want to discuss? Anything else on that, or the magnifiers people want to ask, or do we want to jump into the variable?
Yeah, let's talk about that, man. We talked about rifle optic selection. I think you did a great job of that. We talked about setup. We talked about zeroing. Let's go for that next piece.
So let's talk about the variable. Number one, what you're going to find is a lot of the manufacturers these days will advertise or say they have a true 1-power optic. So if this is a 1-to-6, you get a 1-to-6 or a 1-to-4. The reason they say that is if it's down on true 1-power, I know at least back in the day, 1-power oftentimes was not 1-power. 1-power was like 1.2 or something like that. And the problem with that is when you're looking through it at closer range distance, back in the day when we were doing 3-gun, we wanted a daytime bright optic, so if you have a reticle that lights up, we want it to be daytime bright, which is very rare, and true 1-power. So it literally looks like you're looking through a 1-power red dot. But most of them, when they said 1-power, were like 1.2 or whatever else. So there was a little bit of skewing of the target in the glass, and not saying you can't shoot through them. So that's the number one thing you want to pay attention to is your optic truly 1-power? I believe this primary arm advertises as truly 1-power, which it probably is. The second thing you want to look at is first and second focal point. I had to actually look this up again because I get it confused so often. So with a one versus the other, the first focal plane versus a second focal plane, the difference is when you crank the optic up, the reticle either stays the same size or it increases as you increase the variable up. I think second focal plane, it stays the same size. I may have that backwards. And the point there is not necessarily which is which, but which is better. And there is not necessarily a which is better solution from what I've been told. The bottom line there is if you're using mils or something like that in your optic and you have the wrong focal plane and those mils or the reticle changes size, you can't accurately use those mils at different distance. So if you're using that for windage or elevation or whatever else, then that starts to fail. Now I think if you're using the reticle to collect enough light because you're hunting with it, then you may change. So it really depends on purpose itself. Now this and my Vortex, I believe, are both second focal plane, which means that as I crank it up, the reticle appears the same. And this, if you look at a variable optic, there's so many different reticle options out there. And I really, honestly, Rich, I think it's all purpose driven, and it's really personal preference on what you select. This one has a small hashtag kind of center aiming position, and then it has different distances and wind hashtags. But keep in mind, like I said in the very beginning of this show, for me to use those techniques or references in that reticle would require it to be past that 300-yard distance that I described initially. So I would be using it for competition purpose or hunting purposes or whatever else, in which case then you would literally select the variable optic based on what you want. But if I'm selecting one for a home defense use, multi-purpose, excuse my bump there, the microphone, I want true one power. I want as daytime bright of illumination as possible if it has an illuminated dot in the center of reticle. So I can use it at CQB distance very, very quickly. I could probably use it in the tactical division in 3-gun or whatever else. And then some sort of reticle pattern that allows me to potentially shoot at different distances if I need to. So there you have it.
Well, Taylor has a question. Says, are LPVOs parallax free at their lowest power?
I don't think LPVOs are parallax free at any power. Parallax, so if you take an optic, folks, and stay close to and you move your eye, and the parallax window moves as you're moving your eye, that's parallax. Where if I take a standard 1-power red dot optic and I look through it, I move my eye, nothing shifts other than the fact that my eye is not behind the actual tube itself. So at that 1-power setting, it still appears to have parallax. Look at that. On this aim point, my dot is still turned on, and it's been sitting in my safe for probably 2 years, and it's still on perfectly fine.
Wow.
Not super bright. That was the advantage of the old aim points when I used to run them. Still great optics. I love them.
Yeah, they're
very
robust. Let's see here, Mike. I think that's kind of covering it. Does anybody have any questions for Mike?
Let me add one thing. And like I said, I don't do a ton with the variable optics, but you're going to have to understand that your mounting position for a variable optic is going to be a little more exclusive to the optic you're using, the power you have it on, than a 1-power red dot. So for example, with a 1-power red dot, I may mount it as far forward on the gun as I can get it as long as it's on the upper receiver. On the variable optic, I'm going to mount it so when I get a good cheek weld at that stock length that I have adjusted, I can see through the optic. If it's in the wrong place because of the parallax, I won't be able to see what I need to. So your mounting position for a variable optic, specifically when you crank it up to 6 power or whatever, is a little bit more specific. So just be aware of that and make sure you test it and you shoot with it, and you understand that.
Outstanding. Will is on. He says, good morning, Mike, and the DDC, the Daily Dry Fire Challenge. Yeah. Kyle is on from the Philippines. Bruce says, thank you, gentlemen, for another great show. Bruce, thanks for being on, brother. Any questions for the rifle? Suppressed or not for home defense? Ooh, that's coming from my brother, Jeff. What do you think about that?
Well, I tell you, man, I think that for me to pick up this rifle, right, this is obviously set up for our Wilson Combat Whisper suppressor. A non-suppressed rifle is going to be ridiculously loud. I suppose if that truckload of banditos is pulling up outside your property and they got 7 guys and they're about to start assaulting your house to try to take your generator and your food that they know is there. Once again, that's a totally realistic story, by the way. I'm not even making that crap up, right? I don't know if you care that much about the noise, but I would 100% tell you that I think you're going to be better off communicating with your family members with a suppress. And if you take my current short barrel rifle and touch it off inside of a room around your family and dogs or whatever else, you're just not going to be able to hear anything for a while. So it may affect your communication. So I would certainly say run it suppressed. A PCC, on the other hand, we're talking about home defense rifle and rifle optics, but a PCC in 9mm caliber, it's going to be loud, but it's not going to kill you, and certainly might be a little bit more realistic if you're unsuppressed.
Yeah, the comps today on the ARs, man, they are insanely loud. But what do you find? Because Jeff and I were running his suppressor recently at the range, man, and it was throwing the shots off. Not terribly bad, but enough to know the difference. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, your suppressor, the zero will definitely change, or could definitely change. Now, it's with a suppressor, like on my current suppressed guns, they actually have a gas adjustment little thing on it now that Wilson puts on those guns. So it's good to be able to turn your gas up and down on a gas gun so it's not overgas, because remember, the compressor pushes a lot of that pressure and gas back into the rifle because it doesn't expel from the barrel quite as quickly. But yes, because of that, and just because of how the suppressor is on the barrel, the weight of the suppressor itself, you could definitely see zero shifting. So, if you're like, man, I got a good 0.50, checked it at 100, checked it at 200, but I'm going to go ahead and screw my suppressor on and use that potentially at longer ranges. No, sir. Put the suppressor on and see if you have a zero shift. You probably won't in most cases, but it's not uncommon either to have a zero shift. So definitely check your zero.
Yeah, we did. Guile says, for Mike and Rich, which gun would be your first option to use as home defense or inside the house, a rifle or a handgun?
For me, 100% of the time in my current home would be a handgun.
Yep. Yep. And you want to break down why so they understand?
So, yeah, so in my current home, it's gonna probably have a full-time weapon mounted light on it. It's gonna be a larger size handgun in a quick access safe I have right next to my leg. Maybe not all the time have a weapon mounted light, but the bottom line is it allows me to position the handgun in a manner where I can defend it better, where I can maneuver it better, and it's lighter. It allows me a free hand to deal with family members or to strike or fight or whatever else. It's also very quick to access. It's right there. When I'm not going to pick it up in front of the video camera, but I have a quick access safe by my desk right now. I have one on either side of the bed in my bedroom. And at night, I go into my quick access safe and I enter the code, and the quick access door just pops down. It goes boop. And then, so now my gun is laying there in the safe. So I don't have to get up in the middle of the night and do a bunch of code entering. So if I were to defend myself with a PCC or a rifle, where would I lock it up and have it? I would, because I like to keep my firearms locked up. I don't even have young kids anymore, but I'm not going to leave a loaded gun laying around. Not, unless it's a carry gun and I've taken it off for a brief moment or two. No, so where would this long gun be? So I would have to have some sort of a long gun safe or whatever else near my bed, which I just don't have that. So my rule is I'm going to defend my home inside my home with a handgun. If I have to leave my home and I think I need to defend myself, obviously I'll be carrying the handgun. But in a situation where, like, I'm going out into voodoo land, things are bad out there for some reason, once again, maybe contrived, maybe not, then I'll arm myself with the long gun if I needed to. I may have a long gun in my vehicle at some points in time, but in the house, it's going to be a handgun.
Excellent. I missed this comment from the question from James. He says, on the Holosun, is there a situation where you would prefer the circle dot configuration?
James, on the Holosun, I think maybe if you put me in a circumstance where I was really, I had to shoot very, very close targets, maybe in that case, I'll pick up the bigger, brighter outer circle and the inner dot a little faster. It's just a bigger, more robust illumination glaring out at me that I might pick up faster. I would have to test that speed, but I don't know. In most cases, I'm probably using the window of the optic there anyways. I was surprised as instructors. The mark of a good instructor or person is they change their opinion and they're not afraid to say so. I was surprised that day because I did a couple runs against a guy and I lost one of them. And I'm like, I just want to turn my outer circle off in the reticle. If you're missing the conversation, we talked about this earlier in the show, go back to it. And when I did that, I'm like, oh, the focus on only having that dot changed the aiming equation in my head. That's the best way I can describe it. So, and that's the thing about shooting, folks. If you're listening to us right now on the podcast, train, practice, constantly try different things. I learned some things on some long range practice the other day with a handgun that I already knew, that I had to reaffirm, that my Ian and I were, my training buddy and I just, it was really strange. It's like, I already knew that, but I had to reaffirm it and then experiment with a little bit more, to the point where like, this is such a unique advantage. Interesting.
Yeah. Let's see. Brian says, thank you both for giving your time and knowledge to us. This is always a highlight of my week. And that's not just because I have very few highlights of my life to look forward to. Have a great week. Alan Kelly says, I have a suppressed SBR 9mm as a secondary home defense firearm. Yeah. And my brother has a similar thing here. Gerald says, wall penetration 9mm versus 223. Saw some videos by Gun Talk in the past. The 223 was less penetrative. Do you have thoughts on that, Mike?
So maybe, I mean, I think back in the day, I remember when SWAT teams switched over to 223, and I remember talking to this local SWAT guy, or a buddy of mine. He's like, yeah, you're going to have a lot less penetration. That the 223 is going to frag out and flip around and stop moving in the walls. I don't know. That's not true. I would say that from a physics standpoint, larger, heavier in mass bullets, for example, a shotgun slug versus a 9mm bullet will travel through more things and penetrate through more things. But man, from my experimentation and shooting into walls and whatever else, you're going to have penetration issues with the 9mm and the 223. Do not expect that 223 to stop unless it hits something really solid, or a nail or a big screw or shank or whatever else, in which case it's lower mass, which means that the velocity of it, I think from a physics standpoint, will probably be deflected a little faster than, let's say, a 124 grain 9mm bullet or a 230 grain 45 bullet.
Yeah, great point. You know what? This is something that I've been mulling around in my head about, and I don't know if this is a good place to close or if you have any thoughts on it, but I think having spent most of my life on a flat range, and then as I've gotten into hunting recently, Mike, as I've talked about before, and I had a deer walk out the other day. The only time I put my sights on a deer this year, and I never could get a good shot on the deer to put it down, because the deer is three-dimensional and it's moving, and I just never felt like I can put this deer down without making it suffer. So my point of saying that is there, what are your thoughts on three-dimensional targeting? Does it have a place in maybe just your standard handgun training?
I think it does. In terms of your question, how does three-dimensional targeting equate? And how do we train for it?
Right.
Well, you and I both own a bob. You and I have both shot bobs, the body opponent bag made by Century. They approached me years ago and said, hey, Mike, you could shoot these things. We want to promote it as such, but it's a very expensive target to be shooting up. I get that. Most people aren't going to do that. But that said, I certainly do think that if someone has the ability to invest in something like that. So maybe, here's a good example, Rich. Maybe your local training group buys a bob, and you can use the bob. Dude, you could practice some poking with your knife. Deploy your defensive knife and stick it a couple times, see what that feels like, and you won't slice the bob up. And you can shoot them a lot. Like, I'm talking hundreds, if not probably thousands of times with normal 223 9mm. I wouldn't shoot it with a shotgun. I think there would be value in that if you have the opportunity to train on 3D targeting. Is it worth the money for most people? Maybe. You can take a standard 2D target and start to angle it off and get some of the same effects, but it's not the same.
Yeah. Ruben is on Amador. I hope you're doing well, Ruben. Mike, I don't have any other questions for you. We've kept everybody on here for about an hour and 15 minutes. I think we've given them a lot of stuff to consider when it comes to rifle optics setup. What do you think?
I think so, folks. That's it. Optic setup. Think about some of the things we discussed. Remember, there's not just one solution or one answer. So set up your optic based on the context that you're going to use it, and then test it, zero it, shoot at different distances, shoot it in different weather. Pat K. mentioned shoot it in the rain with a water bottle. I do that all the time in my optics classes. So test it, train and prepare with it like you should train and prepare with it. In the future, you can look forward to a deep dive discussion on handgun, optics, mounting, all that stuff. I think that'll be interesting. I think we're going to do a deep dive into specifically the appendix carry position, Rich. And then I think we have a few other ideas. If you have something else you want to see, hey, send it to us, rich@americanwarriorsociety.com. Mike and Rich, will you explore this subject? Please keep them within the realm of something we have knowledge of, number one, and number two, where I can stay pretty close to the microphone. If you want me to do some sort of advanced movement technique, well, I'll do that on my live stream where I do technical stuff that we don't turn into a podcast.
Yeah, if you're going to ask me how to frame a house, maybe say that question for somebody else. But yeah, Mike, you want to take us out, brother?
Yeah, folks, just remember the fight is coming. Be ready.